11th, 2023. This week there were 63 reported cases of COVID-19 in Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, which shows a 1% decrease over the last 2 weeks. So each subject is comfortable not wearing a mask at this time.
Okay.
All right, do you want to introduce yourself, describe what you're wearing for any watchers who are visually impaired?
Okay. All right. So my name is Stephane Brico, and I'm a 5'8", 58-year-old, average-looking white male. Right. I have a week-old beard, so it's not fully in yet, but I'm working on it. And I'm wearing a striped, a white and black, well, it's a white shirt with very thin black stripes, which gives a little bit of an optical illusion when you look at it. It's kind of fun. And wearing jeans, and other than that, I think that would be it, right?
Yeah, thank
okay.
you.
Yeah.
Great description.
Right.
So we're here today to hear your story with the COVID-19 pandemic.
Mm.
We talked a little bit before. However you'd like to start this with your experience, whenever that begins, for you, if there's anything that came up with that hand map activity that you wanted to share.
Okay, so I suppose there are, I mean, I could do it chronologically, I suppose. Maybe I could start with the beginning process.
Yeah, we can start. Where were you?
Yeah,
when you found out?
right. So I don't have specific memories like you do when you're at, during like 9/11 or, when it's one event that really happens and you're like, where you were at that time, It wasn't that experience for me. But, what it was is an odd sense that we were all in it together in that moment, when it was clear that, okay, this is coming. The news outlets were doing what they do, a lot of sensationalizing of things, but in essence, the reality of it coming was clear, and what it would entail, nobody really fully knew. So everybody seemed to be in the same boat at the same time, and that's certainly the experience I had, and in that way, it was actually very hopeful. It was great to feel a sense of unity, and not just in the United States, but over around the whole world. That everybody was concerned about the same thing, and we all were all in it together. And it I mean, I hesitate to say it this way, but it literally felt good to get. To experience that feeling of community, of we were all in it together, and nobody really knew, and there was tension for sure, but we were all sharing the same tension.
I remember exactly what you're saying too. It's hard to put that into words because something tragic was happening.
Right.
We were aware of it, but at the same time, there were these moments where you felt that unity. Like I remember thinking, I'm stuck at home, but I know everyone else is, not just in my neighborhood, not just in my state or my country, but everywhere in the world. Everyone's experiencing some of these same feelings that I am at the same time.
Yeah, we're basically all doing the same things at the same time for basically the same reasons. And I for me, it felt, and even more in retrospect, at the time, it came with the tension of, okay, so how am I going to pay my bills? What am I going to do? How, but we all had an excuse, it was like it's like we were all in school, and we all had an excused absence, and it was like there was snow on the ground and nobody showed up for school, and that was okay, except we couldn't go outside and play. But it had that feeling to it. Along with the fact that people were dying left and right, and serious concerns. Now, I know I never felt fear about my safety around around catching the disease and dying. Like that wasn't an issue for me, but part of that is a nice dose of denial, which sometimes is helpful. But knowing that people were dying, and a substantial amount of people, like not just a little, and it was coming, and it was more coming, and so it came with a real sense of strife and a sense of, okay, this is a worldwide, it's a catastrophe. It was a catastrophe. Millions of people were dying, and at the same time, I felt held in a communal sense, and especially when for me, I don't know how it is for most people, but I have a hunch that people might be able to relate to this. Is that the daily life in general, where I live here in Charlotte in South Carolina, for me, daily life is a bit alienating, and I don't think it's necessarily because of the place that I live, but we live in a very the process of living is alienating here. We enter into these agreements with people, places where we work, where we're not entirely free to do what we do, and then we go outside of work and everything has been sort of corporatized in some way. So there's a sense of alienation that is kind of inevitable, and that's not just proper to this place, but it's proper to all modern societies. And so, so there's that sense of alienation to begin with. And then, so for me, the fact that we were all together and everybody was like, all right, we're all going to stay inside and, we're going to send you a check, It was so community building. To me, it felt like, oh, we really are all together. We really are going to help each other out. We're really going to make this, it's going to be okay. It wasn't just this sort of, I didn't feel like a sort of atomized being walking around in this sort of, essentially, even if I wasn't physically isolated and had people around me, the alienation is inevitable. And all of a sudden I felt less alienated, So, and it was palpable, for me at least. It was palpable,
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, so that was my first that was the beginning part of it for me.
Yeah. So did any of those feelings shift as they went on?
Well, interestingly enough, they translated into several things, and I think that I wonder if I'm alone in this, but so the George Floyd stuff happened during that time, right? If I remember correctly, it was we were all confined, right? And then for that winter, I think if I remember correctly, and I think I'm remembering correctly, we'll see. But I think we started being confined sometime in February maybe of that year. And I think the George Floyd protest started picking up steam. Well, it started really quickly, but it was that summer, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, maybe spring.
Yeah, somewhere around that time. And I think because I think by then there was this belief that that during the springtime and the summertime that everything would calm down as far as the coronavirus was concerned and the transmission of it. And but the reason I bring that up is because with that sense of community, when the protests happened, I felt a duty to be part of that protest, and so I found myself going downtown to the protests, which I don't know that I would have done, right? And so I think it both, because I felt part of this, because I felt inserted and part of, then all of a sudden I felt like, well, I have not just a responsibility, but a desire to participate in, people voicing something to try to change certain things that need that to my, at least to my, in my view, could use some changing, you know. So I found myself, you know, downtown, you know, and I don't know if it's a story I could tell you now, because it's a fun story. All right, here's the story. All right, so I'm like, this is probably the 5th day of the George Floyd protest, and I haven't been yet, you know. And I'd run into a couple of people that were giving me odd when I asked, okay, what's going on downtown, what's going on, you know, we get these weird answers. Some people would say there's not much going on, or some people would say, oh, it's crazy, you know, or, you know, and but it wasn't stopping. And so I thought, I think it must have been 4th or 5th day. I was like, okay, I'm going. So I go downtown, and the protest starts, and they start, you know, we do certain things. But what I realize is that I'm one of maybe, I don't know, 15, 20% of the white people there, right, at the beginning. And I'm just following along. I mean, I've never been to a protest like this, you know, so I don't know really what, you know, like what happens. Like, what if we get arrested? What if we get beat up? Well, you know what? I was there. I was ready. I was like, when I went there, I left my ID somewhere else. I made provisions for if I was jailed for somebody to come pick me up. I mean, I was like, if I get beat up, I get beat up. You know, I mean, I was ready. You know, I was ready for whatever would come. But I did wear, you know, a mask, right? And so I get there and I just follow along, and what I realize is that the protest itself was very loosely organized, but it was a lot of very young people. So some of the white people get on the outside of the protests as they marched to sort of protect. You know, they were calling it "use your privilege," you know, and so we were on the outside or whatever. Then I figured out, okay, well, where, you know, I don't know where I can be useful, but if I can be useful to put myself between the police and the protesters, I'll do that. You know, so I did that at the beginning of the march, and I found myself in the middle and with my hands up the whole time, which was the whole point. It's like, this is a nonviolent thing, and then we get up. I think it was 4th Street or whatever, and all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose, like flash bombs, the tear gas, all that stuff, you know, and it's happening a couple of 100 meters before me, but I can't really see what's happening because it's over a little hill. And everybody starts running back, like panicked, you know, just running in my direction. And because they're running back, you know. And so I had a decision. I mean, I was like, well, what do we do, you know? And because apparently I was drunk with community, right? I was like, well, I mean, I'm just going to keep going, you know? And so I keep going up the hill, and I get to the top of the hill, and the cops are in full riot gear and just lined up all the way across the street. And they're tossing. By the time I get up there, there's nobody left. It's just literally just me, right? So, and I'm the middle-aged white guy, you know. So it's just me with my hands up, and I approach them, and I go to about, I don't know, 30 yards from them, and I just sit there, right? So they're like, well, they can't. Their intent, and I wasn't entirely sure, but their intent was to start running down the hill and just push everybody back, right? I can't tell what's behind me because I'm too focused on the cops in front of me, so I'm not looking back. And so I'm just sitting there with my hands up in the middle of the street while there's this whole line of cops in riot gear just sitting there. So they start shooting me with pellets, right? They're trying to get me out of here. So they're shooting my legs with pellets, right? And I've played I've played decades of soccer. My legs are like stone. You're not gonna hurt me. So I'm like, whatever. And then they start tossing flash bombs. And I've been to a lot of very loud rock concerts. Not gonna hurt me either, right? And so then they start tossing the more tear gas, and I just gauge the wind and just work my way around, right? So I'm just not moving, and you can tell that it's starting to get a little heated. They're like, okay, what are we gonna do? So finally they line up, and this is where I learned a lot. I learned a lot from this one. Are we good? So they're lined up. They lock arms, right? And at the go, they start walking down, and they're walking downhill because I think it's 4th Street at Brevard or somewhere around there, and so they start walking towards me the whole time, going, move, move, move in unison. But get this. So as they lined up, right, I'm in a specific spot in the street. As they lined up, they put the one woman cop facing me because I'm a white guy, right? I'm a middle-aged white guy. They don't want to hurt me, right? Yeah. So they literally put the one woman cop right in front of me. So as they're walking down, right, she's the first one that comes to me, that gets to me, So I do the nonviolent thing, right? Basically, as soon as they touch me, I go limp, right? And I go completely limp and I fall on them, right? And so they're trying to pick me up, and and finally they were like, okay, because by that time there's like 4 cops trying to pick me up, but what their real goal was to keep running down the hill to go chase those kids, and so they're like, after one of them sees that there's 4 cops trying to pick me up and I'm just limp as I can be, they were like, okay, just leave him. And then they just take off down the street, And so then I pick myself up because, I'm on the ground and got a couple bruises, but nothing, right? And so then I'm like, I'm sitting on the ground and I'm looking around, and I'm like in the middle of all the cops, right? Just by myself. And I just didn't know what to do. I was like, well, what happens now? And so, but I could do that because I was a middle-aged white guy, right? The experience, if I had been, let's say a 22-year-old guy from, who, 22-year-old African-American man, my experience of that would have been 100% different. It would be diametrically opposed. I mean, and so as far as the amount of violence that would have happened. So I kind of walked away from that. Well, then I had to walk the gauntlet of all the cops, to get out. And I couldn't think of anything else but to make jokes with them, right, about the fact that I was no longer a virgin. It was my first, protest, and I was no longer a virgin. And, and then I found the one that looked like he was in charge of everybody and just lectured them about being kind to the kids and, useless stuff. But, but the event itself, for me, it was like an extension of that feeling of we're all in this together, because now everybody's dying and we all have to take the same measures and we're all in it together. It made me feel like I had a responsibility. Yeah. It made me feel part of. And when I'm part of, then it's like, well, I have a responsibility now, So that, I think I suppose that's the story I want to tell about that,
Thanks for sharing that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounded like you were saying that maybe if you hadn't had that newfound sense of community due to the pandemic,
less likely, much less likely I would have gone. Yeah. And it's not that I would care any less about the issue. It's just I would have felt less, almost less able or to insert myself into something like that. Yeah. Because I was inserting myself. It's not like I'm a I'm an activist of any kind, you know. I'm certainly not, you know. And so I was inserting myself into a process of that I don't think I would have done that had I not experienced that feeling of all of us being in it together.
Yeah.
You know?
Do you think that maybe you were more aware of it than you would have been too, because everyone were paying attention to the news, like because of COVID?
I don't think so. No, that's always been very present for me. Like for me, it started early. Like it started with the Rodney King stuff. For me, is that solidified the Rodney King stuff. I was maybe 20, something like that, and that really for me solidified sort of crystallized what the relationship was between the African American community, law enforcement, the general status quo, and around the relationships between the powered and the empowered and the unempowered, you know, and so I've always been very conscious of that, you know. I mean, it's not by accident that I ended up at that one, you know, but still, I'm no activist, you know. Like I'm not waving that flag everywhere, you know. Yeah. The news. I mean, if we can go in that direction, you know, I think the news was very important because there was a pause for a while, you know. The news is really cacophonous, right? I mean, you're hearing so much about so many things, and all of it is catastrophized and exaggerated, and all of it delivered in the same sort of. It's delivered in the same way that you would deliver, you know, the most important news ever, you know, regardless of what it is, and it happens all day, every day, about everything. So there is that, you know, it's like after a while you kind of get a little numb to it, but you're still affected by it, right? Or at least I am. And then for a moment, when it came to the news about the pandemic and COVID, there was kind of a pause in that because there really was something important. You know, there really was something that was catastrophic. There really was something where millions of people were dying, you know. So there was a sort of authenticity to it when it was delivered that I think people could recognize, and I certainly could recognize it. So it felt like there was a pause in this sort of game of catastrophizing into the actual real catastrophizing. And so during that pause, I think it had for me at least, it had the effect of, okay, the news media really is a way to communicate with the outside world in a way that is true enough that it's helpful, and, you know, and it sort of allows me to feel connected with the rest of the world, right? That didn't last very long, but for a while it did, you know. But I think that's not specific to COVID-19. I think same thing happened during 9/11. Same thing happens during these big events where all of a sudden that 24-hour catastrophizing news cycle actually does fit the events that are happening around, as opposed to having to generate all of this crazy event-like stuff in order to justify your own catastrophizing, right? Which is, you know, an odd position to be in if you're one of the people who do the news kind of stuff. But in that case, for that moment, it felt like no, that's, you know, it is a catastrophe, and it fits, right. You know. So in that moment, it worked right, and then after that, I think progressively, right, it goes back to, okay, let's catastrophize about this. Let's catastrophize about that. Let's, you know, with the same zeal as you would a real catastrophe, you know, and you can't tell the difference anymore, you know. But for a while, it felt appropriate.
Yeah, it fit.
Yeah, it fit. So I think what happens after that, I think, as far as the news consumption, like the consumption of the stuff that we get on our screens, that for me at least, it shifted things a little bit in that I necessarily, I mean, I did already recognize, what we were talking about just now, which is that, that catastrophizing and the fact that it doesn't really fit the true value of the event, the true impact of the event for the world or for the community I'm in. And so I'd already recognized that, but to watch the separation between the two, or the difference between the two, where okay, when it does fit, it has a real impact, and then when it stops fitting, there was a lag of time where, well, does it fit? Does it not fit? Because it kind of did, but now it's still like it's never fully yes or no question, right? Mm-hmm. These are not yes or no questions. These are things that you have to evaluate, and so for me, and this is where the cynicism comes in, right? There's a certain amount of cynicism that is inevitable for me. And I don't like cynicism. I want to be very clear. Like, I would rather not have it, mm-hmm. right? I really would. But it's kind of inevitable. And I think it's not just related with the content of what's coming through, the screen or the microphone or whatever. It's also related to the technology itself. So when I'm watching a screen, and I can tell you because I'm old enough to remember, because I come from France, right? When I grew up, there were only 3 TV stations, and they were all owned by the government, right? And they were basically on from 11:30 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, right? So TV was not a common thing, right? And then things loosened up, and it became a common thing. So the way I watched myself and others evolved through that is that our vision of the world, the outside world, right, was before we were staring at a screen that showed us the outside world, was basically the whole world must look a lot like the community we're in, basically. I mean, yeah, there must be some differences, people wear different clothes or whatever, but pretty much, our vision of the world was really restricted by the amount of traveling we were able to do outside of our community, and by the community that we were in. And so, but then when we look at a television that shows us the world, right, there's this natural inclination to believe that what we're seeing in the TV really is the outside world, mm-hmm. the way it is, and it's a normal thing. That's why there was, that's why news is on TV, because we're thirsty to know what the world is like outside of us, right? Mm-hmm. And so the process of watching television has it has a powerful impact on us. Like, it makes us feel like, oh, we have a window to the outside world, right? So we feel less isolated. It's very empowering, right? But also, the content is dictating to us what we believe about the outside world, So it's a relationship that is very tricky between the technology and the effect that it has, and what we need as human beings. So, the more, so given the framework that I'm holding all of that in, when we're stuck inside, and the only thing we have of the outside world is literally what we're seeing on our screen, that is the world we believe is. But that's the world we believe is outside of us. regardless of how well we're trained or careful, to not do that, which it's still happening. Like it's deeper than just our cognition, you know, and so it's still happening, and that's where the cynicism comes in for me. Is that people know that, and the people that create content know that, and because it's a money-driven endeavor. The content is a money-driven endeavor, right? It's made for money, to generate capital, generate money, to generate income, whatever it is. But it's made for the purpose of, right? Because it's made that way. The people that are doing it, I don't know if they forget or they don't know, but I'm hardly the smartest man in town. And if I can figure it out, I'm sure these people know. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, so, and yet they're still choosing to put that kind of content for people to consume. And that to me, like I did feel a sense of cynicism, mostly that there's a French word called mépris. Mépris is contempt, right? There's a certain contempt coming in the direction of the people who are consuming, right? That comes from the people who are creating it, and I'm generalizing obviously, but you know, the people who are choosing to put this out there, you know, they have such a contempt that they don't care what it does to them. You know, like it doesn't matter. They're contemptuous of people like us, you know, and I say like us, but you know, people who are receiving, you know, and that's the cynicism that I got after the initial media interaction with the COVID stuff, when it just gets back into the sort of, you know, let me give you all this crap, and this is and make you believe that this is what the world looks like outside, you know. Yeah. Especially when it obviously creates a sense of alienation, fear, and distrust, and you know, I mean, these are things that are sociologically impactful. I mean, they're really impactful. I mean, if you want to destroy a community, those are the three best things you can come up with. You know, it's like, you know, fear, and I mean, fear is the basis of the whole thing, right? And then after that, it's distrust, and then you generate contempt for others. You know, I mean, how many times do you have to watch somebody be an asshole before you start being contemptuous of that person? You know, so, you know, so. That became more difficult, but still in the context, for me at least, still in the context of, oh well, we're all in this together, you know, and then you have this process of this media-driven process of sort of stoking this fears about the vaccine and fears about government taking over, so they're forcing you to wear a mask, and you know, all of that stuff, which is so incredibly toxic to a community. I mean, just so toxic. I mean, you're just not just that you're pitting people against each other, which you are, right? But you're literally allowing people to die, you know, for some kind of narrative that allows you to charge more, to charge, you know, I don't know, Johnson & Johnson more for their ads. You know what I mean? You know, and that, you know, that was, I don't know, that's been a hard one for me. I haven't recovered from that. I mean, I knew it was there to begin with, but this was so dark, right? I mean, it was just, I mean, that was more dark than the pandemic. You know, the pandemic we could work with. You know, yes, millions of people are dying, but, you know, let's protect ourselves. Like, you know, we know what to do to protect ourselves, you know? What was happening there was just
different kind of pandemic.
But honestly, yeah. I mean, it's a good point to make. I mean, it is like I wouldn't even call it a virus. I mean, it's like but although you could look at it as a virus in a society like that, you know?
It was intentional.
It was totally intentional, and so cynical, so remarkably cynical. And I think that level of cynicism, I don't think I really understood or had experienced that level of cynicism until then. And I think that's one of the things that has really marked me after this whole years-long event is just that remarkable. I mean, remarkable. And I should have known. I mean, you know, when Trump gets elected, right, and with full respect for anyone who like, I don't want to hurt people's feelings or be a jerk about it, but, but with somebody who to a casual observer, right, is obviously not suited for the job, right? I probably should have known when he was elected, right, that, maybe I'm misreading something here, because I did not expect that, right? So clearly I was misreading something, you know? And so maybe that was kind of a prime for the whole thing, you know? And then you have the pandemic, right? And then this cynicism became so blatant. I mean, just blatant. At least when it was just one political party, you know, you were just like, well, it's just, you know, I don't know, maybe they lost their minds or something. I don't know, you know. But then when you see people banding together, and then you see the effort at tearing them apart, you know, I think just for money. That's what it looks like, you know. I mean, I don't know, man. That was shocking to me, and I don't think I've recovered from that. Like, I don't think, and I don't think I could. I don't think anyone could. I mean, it basically pulled off the Band-Aid off, or pulled off the, you know, whatever it may be that was hiding, if not the cynicism itself, but at least the potential for that level of cynicism. You know? So I think that over time has sort of solidified itself, and I don't think it would have happened without the pandemic, or at least would have happened differently. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know. We kind of talked about empathy a little bit before.
Yeah.
And I think, I should know how that impact of cynicism also impacted your empathy. And
Sure.
grappling between the two.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of the process for me. As a rule, I do a lot of projecting. That's just, I don't know why. It's just how I am. But so it's very easy for me to imagine somebody else going through something. Like, it's very easy for me to do, and it's almost it's like a reflex, you know. And the reflex usually is, well, what would I experience if I were in their shoes? You know, I mean, so it's clearly a projection. But aside from that, it's a form of empathy, and that does come usually pretty naturally to me. And I don't think it's certainly not gone. I mean, it's a reflex. I'll always have it. But I'm much more careful now. It was ridiculously, it was odd. The sense of feeling like I was part of the community almost negated the fact that millions of people were dying for me, you know, because they weren't dying in front of me, right? So it was like, yeah, it's terrible, but it's not really impacting, like, it's not me, right? It's not my daughter. It's not, you know, although there was concern there too. So there was this sort of equilibrium for a while, you know. But then I found, all right, I mean, I'm going to go at the very detailed and try to go from there, right? So I found it really, really hard to empathize with people who would walk around and literally put people at risk by choosing to not wear a mask for this very esoteric reason, it's because I can understand not wearing a mask, and if you feel very powerful and you have a reason that anyone could understand, I get that, But this sort of very and I won't call it esoteric reason, where it's just like, oh, the government is telling us to wear a mask, therefore we live in 1984, that kind of thing it was just like, I really struggled to empathize with that. I mean, really did. And still do. As a matter of fact, I can honestly say I was never able to. And I pride myself on empathy. I really do. Like, I'm usually good at figuring out and getting why people do what they do, And I certainly never put myself in a position to say I would never do that, because I do know that given the right circumstances, I would do just like everybody else. I'm clear about that. But on this one, I could not figure it out. I literally couldn't. Like, I just could not figure out how you get to where that's an acceptable way to move around the world. So maybe what it is, and I'm spitballing here off the top of my head, but maybe it's the lack of empathy on their part that I could not empathize with, right? Yeah. And maybe that's part of it, But it was it left me with the sense that there are limits for me. And I can empathize. I can go dark. I can go really dark. I can certainly empathize with murderers, rapists, child molesters. I get it. I can empathize. I'm not going to do it, obviously, and I'm not promoting it. But I can put myself in people's shoes. I'm good at that. Could not get in there. And I think that pointed out the limits of what my own empathy can do, and what I can do with my own empathy, and also that changed my mind about the reality. There's a reality that it's helped change my mind, that I thought that there was no limit. You could always be in somebody else's shoes. Like I really did. Because for the most part I was able to, So it's like, I really did believe there's no limit to that. You could always reach out in the other person's direction. You could always touch someone, And here, I think I begrudgingly was hit in the head with the reality that that's not really true for you, Steph. It's like, no, there really are some people that you cannot empathize with around some of their behavior. Obviously not but around some of their behavior, you just simply cannot. It does not fit a normal, what I would consider reasonable and rational, but also sane narrative, self-narrative or any narrative. And I think that was, I don't know if that's a good thing. I'm always partial to saying if you can incorporate what's real, it's probably better for you, even if it sucks, That's usually my position. But I'm not entirely sure that's true in this case, do I really want to other a group of people, I don't. Truth is, I would rather not, But I think that level of cynicism sort of puts me in that place where that is what I do now, which I didn't do before,
I think that really demonstrates how divisive the last few years have been for people, and it was disheartening because at the beginning, it was like you said, it seemed like, this horrible, tragic things going on, and at the same time, we're having this opportunity for unity and community. Yeah. And then for that to turn around on the other side.
It's shocking, right? Yeah, it's a shocking trajectory for sure. It feels like you get whiplash when you go through that. This sort of psychic whiplash or whatever, I don't know what to call it, but that's the experience I had. There was this moment of, okay, we're going to be all right. And I remember feeling it. Like, I remember being in my apartment And there's another story I'd like to tell about that. But I remember being in my apartment and being stuck there, not working, right? Going, wow, I didn't know I had a right to this, right? I didn't know this was okay to just sit in your apartment and it's okay and not feel guilty because you're not working or you're not doing this, you're not, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, and it felt really, really good. Like, and I don't think that had anything to do, well, I think it had something to do with the fact that the message was stay home and it's okay to stay home and you don't have to go to work and you just, your job is, your community value is in staying home, you know? It was like, it felt really, really good, you know, especially in the context of the world that we live in where your value is how much you produce and what is your work. And, you know, that's where you get your value. You don't get your value from staying home, you know? And, or you really don't get your values here in this case. In general, you get your values from your work, you know, here in this context, you know, which is not the case in other places, you know, or at least less the case in other places. But here, you know, values of being at work. So you're literally being told, stay home. Your value is in you staying home. It felt good. Like it felt really, really good. Aside from the sense that you're all part of the same thing, you're also being told that something that is relatively unnatural, right? I mean, going to work 9 to 5 is not something that's very natural. You know, we do it because we have to and we want jobs and we want money or whatever, but it's not something that's natural, you know? And so, you know, all of a sudden it's like something that has been unnatural the whole time, you're told, stop doing it. Your value is in not doing it, you know? It felt good to me. Like it really, really felt good to me. And then, you know, and then the process sort of evolves, and then that little piece has to be reinstated. I mean, you know how hard it was for people to go back to work. You know, to go back to the actual place where they work. Yeah. Right? It was very ridiculous. People got it. People in general really got it. They were like, oh, well, this feels much more real, much more human, much more normal, you know.
This is how life should be.
This is how life totally should be, right? So a lot of people got it, you know. And that was a wonderful experience for me too. It's like, because, you know, in fairness, I'm not like work is not the center of my life and I don't want it to be the center of my life. Like, so, you know, so to have that sort of to be part of an experiment, because really this is what they were. We were just trying, right? So to be part of an experiment where we said, hey, everybody stay home, see how that feels, you know? And everybody going, yeah, that feels good, you know? That was like it was a good reminder for me that I'm not necessarily feeling, you know, I'm not crazy, you know? It really does feel better, you know, to not be in these situations where you have to, you know, brave traffic, work your 9 to 5 in these weird environments where you're sort of, you know, how would you call it? Like you're commodifying your own freedom, really, right? I mean, you're just saying, hey, for this amount of money, I won't say the certain things. I will restrict myself to certain areas. I will, you know, it's like you're just commodifying your freedom, right? And which, you know, I'm not saying good or bad, but that's what we're doing. And so, you know, to not have to do that, it feels good, you know, and it's a reminder, right? It's like, oh, yeah, I forget, you know, but yeah. Yeah, that is what we normally do, right? So there's that. And I don't know where I was going with that, honestly, but there's a story I do want to tell also, and that's a very personal story. I have a 17-year-old daughter, right? So as it was happening, she was, you know, 13, 14, and her name is Tess, and Tess and I were, so Tess and her mom have been divorced since Tess was about 4, right? So she has almost no memories of us together, and for me that's what I thought would be best for her, as opposed to either waiting and trying to make it work in an environment that would have driven her nuts, or yeah. We good? Okay. So or or then, you know, wait till she's like 6 or 7, and then the separation would be sort of this tragic event, you know. And I was like, okay, well, let me just do it now. So anyway, so her mom and I shared custody. I would have her 2 days a week and every other weekend, and she would have her 2 days a week and every other weekend, you know. So we would do it that way, and we did it that way till she was about 12, and then the pandemic happened, and it didn't make any sense for her to go back and forth anymore because of the pandemic, and so she ended up staying with her mom, who, you know, I mean, and that part was okay with me in the sense that, you know, I live in a 1-bedroom apartment, and the 1 bedroom is hers. You know, like I sleep, I sleep in the living room, but her mom has this, you know, 4-bedroom house and a pool in the back, and, you know, all of that stuff. And so I'm like, please, yes, if you're going to spend your teenage years, have at it. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, that makes sense to me, and that's totally okay with me. Plus, you know, at some point you need to be in one spot, you know, because it is destabilizing, and so I was okay with that. But what happened? Her. How can I be? I want to be generous and factual at the same time. So, let's just say her mom had a different idea of. Her mom has specific needs. We'll put it that way. So her mom has specific needs that involve her relationships. So anyway, the point is that from the time that the pandemic started to now, Tess has not even she spent a night maybe twice with me, you know. So I went from having her, you know, every other day and every other weekend just staying with me to none almost overnight. And now this is on a personal basis. This is not a big picture thing, you know. On a personal basis, that broke me. That genuinely broke me. Like, and I definitely have not recovered from that. You know? And that definitely would not have happened without the pandemic. Now my relationship with Tess is, I mean, I work on it every day, and we talk every day. I see her every week, but it's not the same. I mean, I'm watching her. You know, it's almost like I'm watching her from the outside now. You know, which is really for me, you know, it's heartbreaking, and so, and I really do think that the pandemic and what the expectations were around what we do during the pandemic really just sort of solidified this divide that was created between Tess and me. And with the help of, you know, I mean, it wasn't just that, obviously, you know, but it really helped sort of give it definiteness, if that's a word, you know. And that's been really tough, you know. That's been really rough. It was also rough to watch Tess having to try to go to school on her first year of high school, online, and I mean, that really screwed her, you know, like really screwed her. It became really, really difficult for her. I mean, she still does okay, don't get me wrong, you know, but that whole year was basically a waste, you know, as for academically at least, you know, it was almost a waste for her. And it was heartbreaking to watch, you know. I mean, she would sit there in front of the computer trying to pay attention, you know, you know, and then with her sense of isolation, you know, as a 16, 14-year-old, whatever, you know, I mean, that's not an easy one, you know. Right. So as far as my child, COVID was a tough one for her. You know, like it really had a huge impact on her life with my relationship with her and her relationship to me, you know, I mean, and then her relationship with the institution of school and all of that, and with her sense of self-worth around, you know, I mean, she went from being a straight A student to, you know, she made a C, she made a, you know, I mean, and her vision of what was possible, you know, has shifted, and her ambition about her future has shifted, and part of that is being a teenager, of course, you know, but a substantial part of that is about you know, this sort of basically 2-year-long event, you know, that really drastically changed how she lived her life. So I think that for me as an adult, I mean, it had these sort of intellectual repercussions and some psychological repercussions, but not, you know, it doesn't fundamentally change who I am. For Tess, not the same. You know, for Tess, it had a serious impact because these are really, you know, these are formative years. And,
exactly.
Right?
Your worldview is already changing so much that at that age.
Yeah. So imagine the cynicism that she's exposed to, that for her is the normal. Yeah. You know, that's the normal for her. I mean, that's a scary thought. You know, like how do you teach someone to not be cynic, to not be a cynic? How do you teach that? You know?
Especially when, you know, what you were saying earlier, it's kind of inevitable and kind of a survival instinct, I think. And, I mean, yeah, like as we're talking, we're still in it, you know? So it's like, how can you help someone to be less cynical when we're still in the situation to some degree that forced them to become cynical?
Right. I mean, there's no stepping out of it to look at it from, you know, to look at it from the outside.
Yeah,
you know,
there's no retrospect.
Right. There's no distance to be had, you know, and that, yeah. I mean, I don't know how to teach her. I mean, we're gonna like this. It's funny, and this is completely has nothing to do with this. But in June, Tess and I are going to France, right? So she doesn't speak French. She's taken a couple of years of French in high school, knows a few things, but in general doesn't speak French. Her mom is American, and you know it just wasn't going to happen. So, but in June, she and I are going to go to France, and that's part of the thing that I'm hoping that she's getting exposed to. Now, it won't be long enough for it to have a giant impact, but it may be a seed, you know, that she'll be exposed to a different way to live, right? So that she can have some perspective. She can have a little bit of distance when she looks at her own life and, you know, and how she's living and where she's living and the culture that she's submersed in, you know, or immersed in. And so I'm hoping that trip outside in a different cultural milieu, right, will allow her to come back and have a little bit of distance, you know, and because I think if you can have a little bit of distance from it, I think you can sort of recognize the cynicism, but also like position yourself in opposition to it. Yeah. You know, as opposed to sort of just being bathed in it and recognizing it, but it doesn't make any difference whether you recognize it or not. You're still bathing in it. And so you're being affected by it. But if you can position yourself in such a way that you go, you know what? I am not going to listen to this.
Yeah.
I am not going to, I'm going to minimize the amount of cynicism I'm exposed to, as opposed to just being so used to it. You're just bathing in it. You're just like, yeah, I recognize it, but whatever,
Starting to challenge it instead of just taking
Right.
it in.
Yeah. And even if you recognize it, you're still taking it in, But yeah, challenging it and saying no, literally saying no, I'm in opposition to this, And as a 17-year-old, I think it's important to be in opposition to something,
Yeah.
Right?
I really appreciate that perspective.
Right. I mean, I think it's important, right? I mean, it's like, if you're 17 is, it's, everybody's different at 17, but it's a great time to look around and go, no, right? I mean, because you're seeing everything with fresh eyes and you're like, why are we doing this? And then you can, position yourself, and I think it's a great time to do it.
Yeah.
But if you're immersed all day, every day, there's no position to take, right? Because nothing is firm, right? I mean, how do you position yourself against this sort of wispy kind of, continually evolving and molding thing? It's almost like trying to fight against an octopus. He's got 8 legs and he's got suckers and it moves in all directions. It's not even firm. You can squeeze it, nothing will happen. You know what I'm saying? It's like it's very hard to position yourself against something like that with a firm hand. But I think if you can, and it's my hope. Like if I can give her a cultural, and here this is probably useful for, as people who come from a different culture, right? It's like if you're bathed in another culture, right? It does help you see the culture that you're in, and in a different way, and it gives you that distance, right? And I think if you can have that distance, then the opposition it's still tricky, right? Because the stuff that's coming to you is very amorphous, but you can still go, okay, all right, because there's something else. There's something else. If you don't know there's something else, like what position is there to take? So that's my hope for her, and we'll see. She's smart. I mean, she'll be all right. But those events they've helped shape her idea of what's possible and what's not possible in a way that has really taken some of her ambition and drive for something that she might want, recognize, desire, want to implement. It's really taken some of that away from her, because there was a physical impact. I mean, it changed her life, and not in a particularly, it wasn't fun, right? I mean, it wasn't fun. It was isolating, and it was, so that's where I am with that. Yeah.
Yeah, as you're talking about France, so you had your childhood in France, and so during the pandemic, did you have connections to people who were in France?
Yeah. That was interesting. I talked to my sister more during the first year of the pandemic than I've ever talked to her. Yeah, she's in France, right? And so, she would. She had. There seemed to be that same sort of. French word is recroquevillement. When you sort of close in within yourself, so all of a sudden the relationships that are your closest relationships become more important, so you're not interacting with people at work or in the street or in all these sort of easy kind of, and I don't mean shallow in the pejorative sense, just shallow, relationship. You're just stuck with the ones that are the core ones, and so I think for her, she felt she had the same response, which is all of a sudden she's calling me all the time, calling our dad and our mom, and she just sort of looking at the core relationships, and their experience in France was they still haven't recovered. She runs she owns a wine bar in a little town outside of Lyon, and from what I can tell, her business has never recovered, and she keeps trying different things to bring people in, but because people are not going out as much as they used to. Excuse me. Now, obviously, the last few weeks is very specific. Things are very specific right now. I mean, everybody's in the street protesting. There's a lot of great strikes and things like that about the retirement age changing. But beyond that specific portion of time, people are not going out the way they used to. Their habits have changed. Their habits of interaction with the outside world, interaction with groups of people, interactions with the institutions that they're in. So it used to be, as far as I can remember, French people were pretty good at living their lives the way they, they're pretty good at their quality of life stuff, and so they're out. They have meals, a lot of meals together, a lot of aperitif, and you name it. They get together, drink, and eat, and there's a lot of that, right? And apparently, according to her at least, since the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, those habits have really changed, which is heartbreaking, right? Because that is what keeps that society together. Other than that, you might as well live here. It's just, there's very little difference, and so hopefully that will come back, and hopefully with full respect for her business, it's specific to her business, but things have changed as far as how much people go and do what they do. And for her specifically, she seemed to really like not going to work. Like that really worked for her too, And, and the French situation was a little bit different in that while the government here helped businesses stay afloat, they stay afloat through loans that, from what I understand, a lot of them were forgiven eventually. But you have to, you have to have loans. You have to, you have to work at it and kind of plan on paying it back and all of that stuff. In France, if I remember correctly, and I understood correctly, it was a little bit different in that they went ahead and just they basically gave you what your business did the year before. So for a year, your business was afloat and you were fine, and so I think for a while it felt like, damn, life is good. Yeah. Life is pretty good. Now they were much more strict about wearing a mask, much more about confinement. Like if you were out in the street, like cops come say, hey, why are you out in the street? And you had to have a little paper that says I'm out walking my dog, or whatever, but you literally had to have a pass, And, but nobody was fighting that, it's like, yeah, we're all in this together and, we're all going to wear a mask. And yes, it's a pain in the ass, but it's not the end of the world. And I'm sure you can fake a note, which of course people did, but, it's like, it just wasn't that big a deal. It seemed right. It seemed draconian. Here, it would be impossible to do. Like people would literally, like they'd probably end up shooting each other, it's like, because that's what people do here. But there they could, and and it went, I can't say that it went much better, because when you look at the numbers, percentage-wise, I mean, it's not as much as the States. People didn't die as much as they did in the States, but it's not like a 10-to-1 deal, I mean, but also the population is older, and, so there are other, and they all live on top of each other, right? It's not spread out like it is here. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are lots of reasons why the transmission was probably more acute there, right? But even with that, they were able to keep the death a little bit lower, and I think it's because there was a little bit less cynicism about people's relationship to embedded in their relationship to the structural environment that they're in, So I talked to my dad a good bit. He's here in the States. He was in, and it's interesting, by the way. I saw him. I don't usually see my dad as a fearful person. Like, that's not what I see in him. But he was genuinely fearful. He's an older man, right? And he told me, and he doesn't share that kind of stuff with me very often, but he told me, he said, I felt like people didn't care if I died. I was just old and useless, And so he was he was 80 maybe, and an active 80. Like he's raising a 7-8-year-old girl, and I mean, he's just active, But he really did have the sense that, people were kind of, he was just an add-on to society, and that, he was expendable, So he was terrified, He didn't get his hair cut for like a year, so he had a little ponytail, which is hilarious. And so, yeah, didn't get a haircut, was just super, super careful throughout the whole thing. But we did talk a good bit during that time too. I think in general, at least my experience was that the sort of core family, like nuclear family people, sort of like everybody reached out to each other. Yeah. Was that your experience too?
Yes and no. I think, kind of back to what we were saying, unfortunately, like politically, if you had different views and approaches, then so certain family members, it created more distance, and other family members that you could be on the same page with, it helped you. Yeah.
It's amazing how toxic that is, right?
Right.
It literally pulled families apart.
Yeah.
That's just, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just, and in fairness, it did the same thing in our family. I mean, my dad is married to an American woman. She has a son who had a daughter who had a daughter. Well, anyway, the point is, these are, and I'm using shorthand, right? When I say Trump people, that's a shorthand for something, so maybe let's not use that. These are, well, I mean, they were people whose viewpoint was in lockstep with some of the media, some of the very conservative media that's out there, like like Fox News or anybody else. I don't know that many of them, but and so their position was drastically different, drastically different, except for his wife, so my stepmother, who's very old, so she was like, no, she was scared, so she got she got it, but all the other ones.
She got COVID?
No, she did get COVID, but she got vaccinated, yeah. But the others, and I want to try to say it without derision, right? Because I want to be respectful. But again, this is where that cynicism comes in, that it's hard for me to be empathetic. So I just claim that it's hard for me to be empathetic. And, but they, I was at the point where I no longer was willing to interact with any of them, which quite honestly, to this day, I'm still not interacting with them. Because, their positioning, I mean, it's fine that they were wanting to elect somebody that I thought was a carnival barker with no morals. But that was what I thought, fine, But then when it came to putting people at risk, and physically at risk for, like I was saying, for some, really far-fetched idea, even though I get that it's born out of not knowing a lot, I get it. I mean, you can be taught into anything if you don't know anything, so, granted, but these are people who are not necessarily unintelligent. Like you can inform yourself. I mean, it's not that hard, so, but even, even given that, I just, it's like, I can't, well, I don't want to, honestly. I mean, it's not that I can't. I mean, I could find a way to interact with them, and I could just, not talk politics or not talk, we'd have to not talk about a lot, there'd be a lot of talking about how good the macaroni and cheese is, but, and I certainly run out of things to say pretty quickly when it comes to that, so, but yeah, no, I think it did put a very solid demarcation line between groups of people within that family, for sure. Now there were precedents, obviously. It's not as if that did everything, but it really allowed for a clear line. Yeah. A clear line.
And it was, I mean, tell me if you felt this too, especially with parents who are older. So, like, for example, my dad was older, but he wouldn't get the vaccine or anything, and so he kept trying to visit me during that time, and I was like, okay, if you won't do anything to protect yourself or protect others, it's up to me then. And so it drew this line because I refused to see him because, and he has diabetes,
So you literally had to reject him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, I saw that as, out of love and care for him and trying to protect him, but he just saw it, obviously very differently.
How did he see it?
Very divisively. He kind of took it a political way and made it just was like, oh, they got my daughter, and now it's them plus my daughter versus me.
Yeah.
It's kind of yeah.
Yeah. I think that all of that was really exacerbated, I think, by the pandemic. That view that it's us versus them view. Granted, it's been going on for a very long time. I mean, that othering and that sort of sense of, or that ability to look at everything in a black and white situation, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe that comes regardless, But yeah, I mean, we were dealing with a group of circumstances that made it so. The French expression is a fleur de peau. It's when it's right near the surface, right? It brought everything right up to the surface. This instinct of you and them, and I'm right, and I have the viewpoint, and the others are wrong, and have not only just the wrong viewpoint, but they're coming to get us, right? They're coming to take what we have or whatever it is that they're doing, and that is, and I think that the idea, because the pandemic, I think, also brought in this sense of danger, right? That didn't exist before. I mean, there was danger. There's always danger everywhere. But this is like worldwide, cataclysmic, Armageddon-style danger, So anybody who's, and I'm going to say this probably should be precise about this, but everybody who's like religiously inclined, you know, who has who holds these narratives of good versus evil, and you know, it's all good and bad, and Satan versus God, and you know, so for them, man, they're in it. Like the world is finally showing them and matching that sort of cataclysmic vision and narrative that they sort of choose to believe in, if they do, right? Or they're inclined to believe, you know? So I imagine for people like that, it must have been like, oh, it validates everything that they sense, right? I mean, and I don't come from a religious background, you know, so I'm always walking on eggshells when I talk about it because I don't really know, you know. But from the outside, it's what it looks like, you know. Do you come from a religious background?
Yeah. So today I'm not really, but yeah. So family members and like my mom, for example. Yeah, it was very much. It was a dramatic time, but that did make things even more dramatic. And like you said, I think it did validate a lot of people that had that narrative going of like good versus evil. You know, because the phrase we kept hearing was like these unprecedented times, and you know, made me think of like, oh, like we're living through history, and I think some people took that as like, you know, it's like a biblical event, like that volume. Yeah, the intensity of it, the broadness of it, you know, it's Armageddon, right? You know, I mean, basically it's that vision of, you know, the cataclysmic vision. I wonder, like, did the fault lines in your family fall along the religious fault lines? They did? Yeah. So it sort of fed into that. Yeah. Right. And I think, you know, I mean, for me personally, I think for a lot of people, like just my own religious, spiritual views changed a lot with the pandemic, and even, and I think it was because more than ever before, I was thinking about life and death.
Yeah.
And what is the point of life, and how precious is life, and how short is life, and how do I want to spend my life, and what do I think about what happens when this life is over?
Yeah.
And, you know, reflecting on all that more than I ever had before.
Were you? So you're 27. So this happened like early 20s for you, right? Yeah. So, 24. Yeah. So when your religious training, right? Were you still fully engaged in your beliefs and all of that? You were. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. At the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, for you, man, it must have been it must have been intense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think. So I'm always very interested because, you know, I come from a very secular environment. France is a very secular environment, right? So I didn't grow up with any religious beliefs at all, at least none I was aware of. And so I'm always very curious what that does to someone as a child, right? I mean, because these are intense beliefs. I mean, you know, this sort of Satan and God battle happening, and then your internal, like, that savior mechanism, right? You know, where it's like, I'm saved, but then am I really saved? And then, you know, and so that sort of self-questioning about, and then the message, which is you're faulty unless you're saved, right? So then your savior is super important, right? But it's so amorphous, right? It's like, it's not as if you know, somebody said, okay, good, you're it. You know, it's like, right? So I can just imagine the amount of anxiety that must produce. I mean, was that your experience?
Yeah, I can talk to you about it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We're off track because that's just my interest. Yeah, sorry.
No. Yeah, I'll talk to you about it after, but that does make me think. So then, your family, you said at the beginning that you weren't super fearful for yourself.
I was not.
Fearful for your dad and your stepmom?
Honestly, no, and I'm not sure why. Part of it is that I come from a background where trauma was kind of a normal thing. Like it was psychologically unstable, you know. So I've learned to not, like, I don't fear death. Death, I'm okay with dying, honestly. And I don't really fear death for other people either. Like I've really have a relationship with death now where I'm just like, it is just what it is. So it may be a peculiarity of mine, right? I'm not sure. But I did not fear dying. My dad, I watched him fear dying. Like it was clear he was afraid. Yeah. You know, it was clear that my stepmom was afraid. You know, they were afraid. I was not. You know, and again, that may be a peculiarity of mine. I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm not sure it's a healthy one either, but it is what it is. Yeah.
It sounds like it would help you cope during the pandemic.
As far as that's concerned, totally. Like, I did not panic about Tess, my daughter. I did not panic about anybody. Like for me, it was like, you know, it's obviously don't want anyone to die. I mean, clearly, you know, and I certainly don't want them to be afraid of dying, you know. But that's not. I can't deal. There's nothing I can do about that, you know. Yeah, but I didn't walk around in fear of death any more than I normally do, and I don't, in general, fear death that much. I don't look for death, you know, but I don't fear it.
So did your dad then? Would you normally see him in person, and you know, he wouldn't get his haircut?
Right. So I saw him one time during the active part of the restrictions around the pandemic, and it was very quick. He wasn't particularly happy to see me because I was bringing germs, you know. But that was about it. But in fairness, we don't see each other that often anyway, you know. So that was not a drastic difference. No, I think the difference was for him, you know. It was he was genuinely afraid, and you could see it, you know. You could tell, and so was his wife. You know, it was the fear, I think, that was most noticeable. Everything else, as far as the pattern of interactions, didn't change that much. With him, at least. Yeah.
And then, so from the beginning of the pandemic to today, do things seem to be more normal? Or?
No, I think things have shifted. Yeah, I think they have. And I think part of it is my response to it, less than it would be, you know, a sort of gradual thing that happens between people, you know. But I think because I've become a little more cynical, right? I've also become a little more demanding of the people around me, and the people that I do choose to hold close. Excuse me, and I have less flexibility around the things that I value in relationships. I'm at the point now, and I think it is related to the cynicism, is that I expect honesty. I expect not just honesty, but authenticity in the close relationships that I have, and I expect that, and I ask for it, you know, literally, and I don't think that's something that, in their case, they're capable of doing or willing, even actually not willing. So, you know, so there's distance now that was there before in a different way and less acute, and so I think it has more to do with my setting certain boundaries around what the relationship I want is and should look like. But I do think it does come from partially from that experience of really recognizing that unless I really ask for those things, I'm gonna get the cynicism, you know. So it's a form of protection from this sort of I think in essence what I'm doing is I'm being much more careful with my empathy.
Yeah.
You know, I'm being more selective about where I use that muscle, and I think that has something to do with what I learned through this whole process. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that makes me any different than anybody else around this. I think, but maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Different from who you were when it began?
I think there's a difference, right? I think there is a difference. Yeah, no, I think there is a difference, and I think the difference is that ultimately, when we were confined, I felt safe. You know,
Yeah.
like I felt safe. I'm in my apartment. I'm by myself. You know, isolated as hell, but safe. You know, and I think I wanted to carry that safety out. And in order to carry that safety out, then you have, for me, I had to create certain boundaries around the people around me to continue to feel safe. And I don't mean safe in that I'm not going to catch COVID, right? Mm-hmm. You know, because that's, you know, it's what I psychologically learned, you know, from the isolation, not just that, you know, there's a communal, there's all that stuff, there's the obvious cynicism and all that, but it was also the fact that psychologically I was like, oh, well, this could work for me, you know. It's like, oh, that distance works.
Yeah.
You know, it works, and I try to continue some of that distance in a psychological sense. You know? Mm-hmm. So I think I would imagine that that's related, you know, but you know, I mean, you'd have to do a whole analysis to really point it out, but it seems that way to me. Yeah, yeah. What about you? I mean, have you changed?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think also just being in my mid-20s, that was always going to be
a transition. Yeah.
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 But yeah, I think what you're saying about empathy, I definitely get that, and I think that we really had to change the way that we dispense empathy because everyone was being collectively traumatized, and if we just extended empathy to everyone around us, I mean, we'd burn out so quick.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it's just not possible.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So you became more selective about your empathy too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a hard reality, but kind of a product of living through something like that.
Yeah. And it might be a more, and I don't know this, but maybe you have this experience. It might be a more healthy way to move through life.
Yeah.
Than to just be, you know, empathetic to everyone and everything all the time. You know?
Yeah. Because I think that, in being selective, we're able to be more empathetic to the people or populations that we select to be empathetic towards.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I like that. That makes sense to me. Do you think it was a positive experience for you? I mean, did it change you for the best, do you think? For the better?
Yeah, I think so. Which, you feel bad saying.
A little, right? Yeah. People died left and right, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think definitely still some residual anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't wipe down my groceries anymore like I did at the time, you know, and but there is still that lingering fear. I mean, you know, as we report the numbers at the beginning of this video, it's there's a decrease and, you know, life is going on, but at the same time, people are still dying from it, even though it's not as many as before and at the rates as before, everything, but.
Do you interact the way you socialize with people, has that changed between before and after?
Yeah, but I also think that probably just...
Well, you were in a specific situation, right? I mean, yeah.
But I mean, even just from concerts, like concerts are something I loved doing before.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gone to concerts since, and like, I think, and even like basketball games. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a big basketball fan, so going to like NBA games, just those are the times that I've been around so many people, and I didn't feel like discomfort or anxiety in those situations before, and I do now.
You do now, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you say in general, is your anxiety level higher in general now than it used to be?
Probably.
Yeah.
But also probably a product of other things.
Yeah, of course.
But I do think definitely part of that from COVID, yeah.
Yeah.
How about you?
That's interesting. I don't know. I'm anxious anyway, right? So, you know, it's hard for me if it's more or less. It's hard for me to know if it's more or less. But I think, I'm trying to think. I don't know. More anxious now around people. No, I don't think I'm more anxious now around people than I used to be.
That's good.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I do feel like on some level I'm less connective. And I think maybe, and I don't know, you maybe you've had this experience, but I think I'm less wanting of other people's reflection of me.
Mm.
You know, like I think I've spent, and I know this is kind of a innate sense that we do. You know, we a lot of us consciously, unconsciously, at different levels, rely on the other person to sort of give a reflection of who we are, so that we can validate who we think we are. You know, and I think. And I don't know if this comes with age, or if the pandemic has something to do with it, or the isolation of the pandemic times, or my relationship to people that I'm struggled to empathize with, you know. But I think I'm much less dependent or desiring of other people's reflection of me to validate who I am. But I think there's a marked difference between before and after the pandemic for me around that, you know. But that's not something that I could have said a year ago. Like, that's really something that takes time to see for me, you know.
Yeah.
But it kind of looks that way for me, you know.
Yeah.
Do you have that experience? Do you know?
Yeah, I think no one's getting out of this untouched.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Like, one way or another, like whether it's physically or psychologically, or, you know, I think as you're talking about not caring about how people, you know, reflect on you, I'm thinking about also, like, I think judgment is something that has changed. Like, you know, a few years ago, I didn't really know, like, people around me, their stances on vaccinations or things like that, or, like, you know, you couldn't have guessed how people would behave during the pandemic with, like, masks, like, policies and things like that. And I do find myself, I think that maybe I have become more judgmental.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because it felt like people were wearing markers that, like, I interpreted as, like, measures of their empathy.
Yeah.
Right? So I would be like, oh.
Or lack of. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, I think maybe there is some to that, right? Yeah, I mean, I certainly know my thing. There's some people that I choose not to empathize with, and that is a way of judging, you know? I mean, how am I judging that this is a person I'm not going to empathize with? You know, I mean, I have to make that judgment. So I think I probably am more judgmental, you know? But it's interesting because I don't think it's the pandemic itself that did that, right? I mean, it's the reflection of ourselves in this technology and, you know, in this content that has taught us that, you know, that has brought us there. You know, I think it's not the transformative thing, I don't think is the pandemic. I think the transformative thing is the pandemic in the environment of the technology and content that we're consuming. That seems to be that way. I mean, because I think it would be a vastly different. And actually, we can even do an experiment on that, right? I mean, different content, different results, right? I mean, when you look at, I'll look at France, since that's what I know. Well, they didn't have all the content about this becoming 1984, and they have a different language content, right? So there's some limitations about the bleed over. There's some bleed over for sure, but there's some limitations around that bleed over, around ideas and stuff like that. And so they were not consuming this, and again, I'm gonna use this as shorthand, but this sort of Trumpian kind of it's hard to qualify because I'm trying not to be pejorative, right? I'm trying to, but I don't know how to qualify it, So, so this, whatever that is, they were not being inundated with those narratives, that are believable, to certain groups of people here, and they had a different response, They did not have people walking around going, government is trying to, I don't know, microchip. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. I mean, that just wasn't happening, because they were not interacting with the same content,
That would be a very different pandemic experience. Like, those are so tied together for me when I think about the COVID.
Yeah, right. And that was not their experience at all, And they had other problems, but that was not one of them, And I think it's not the pandemic that was so destructive. I really don't. But I do think that what we consumed during the pandemic, I do believe that it has changed this. And that's not to say everything was good before, right? I mean, it's a process, but it accelerated the process of this. This is exaggeration, but like a sort of cultural
reset.
Not even reset. I think it's a disintegration. I mean, it's part of a disintegration, and I mean, it's obvious that the sort of Western culture is towards the end of its life, and that's fine. But so we're gonna go in that direction anyway. But this really accelerated it. It's almost as if like people are, it's like the world is burning and people are dancing. It's like,
yeah.
It's like you just get the sense that, oh, okay, yeah, we're at the end here, right. And that means different things, and it's a long view, so it's not like tomorrow everything's gonna be gone, but I think that the COVID experience here, I think, just really accelerated that. There may be, and this is what I'm hoping. What I'm hoping is that there will be a rebound, where people will sort of start looking at each other with empathy again, But that starts with me, right? Right? I mean, and I think this one's a hard one. This one's a really hard one. I mean, and that doesn't, I'm not saying that those are things that lead to like a civil war or something like that. That's not what I'm talking about. But as far as the fabric of, the sense that we're all in it together, that's going to be a hard one to gain back.
Yeah.
It's going to be a really hard one to gain back, And that's the cynicism I have is not that that it's not about the people, it's about that. It's about the people who choose to make money out of it. That's what bothers me. Or do it for their own, benefit. Like they're destroying the fabric of our communities for their benefit. It's nothing new, I get it, but still, it's just dark. It's
Yeah.
really dark, you know? And I think COVID just really, like that whole experience really just marked. I mean, you're marked forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, Tess is marked forever. I'm marked forever. You know, 9/11, when 9/11 happened, you know, yeah, it was marked, but, you know, it was, you could still have an assessment, right?
Yeah.
You could still look at it and go, yeah, but, right? I think for a critical mass of people, that's no longer possible. Yeah. There's not going to be a yes, but anymore. You know?
Yeah.
It's just going to be yes or no. Yeah. So I think, you know, that's my experience. You know, whether it's highly personal and that it's unique to me and it doesn't resonate with anybody else, maybe, but that's definitely my experience so far.
Thanks so much for sharing. Yeah, was there any
Thank
other
you.
part of your experience that you feel like we didn't get to touch on?
No, but I do want to say, and I think I'm repeating this, but I want to highlight it. I did not feel excluded I didn't feel like a foreigner when we were all stuck together inside, and that was the right thing to do. I just did not feel like a foreign person in this world, in this society, you know, for that period of time. And as much as there's a gift to feeling like you're from somewhere else, because it does give you a perspective that if you're in it, you can't really necessarily see, right? And there's some gifts to that, a lot of gifts. It's also nice to not feel like you're an outsider sometimes, you know. And I think for that time, during the time where we were all in it together and we were all going to stay inside and it was going to be okay, just stay inside, and everybody was doing it. My neighbor was doing it. You know, the guy who sells pot downstairs was doing it. The people upstairs would, you know, it's like everybody, you know. You know, it didn't matter where you came from. It didn't matter how rich you were. It didn't matter if you sold pot or if you didn't. You know, it's like it was, you know, we were all doing the same thing together. I felt a sense of unity that I liked. I really liked it, you know, and it felt good.
Yeah,
you know,
as you're saying that, I'm like, it was like we were coming together for this common purpose, for the greater good.
Yes, right? You know, first, I'm not going to die, but second, I'm going to make sure you guys don't die, you know? I mean, you know, it's actually kind of moving me emotionally talking about it right now. It's just like, it's like yes to that, you know? Yes to us caring for each other, right? And especially yes to us caring for each other by not going to work. Oh my God, even better, right? It's like, oh, you know, how much better can that get, you know? So I think in that moment, for that period of time, I think I liked it. I liked it, and I thought it was communal, and I thought it was kind, and I thought it was in the context of everybody being scared and dying, you know. And maybe, well, not maybe. I mean, I'm sure that given the right circumstances, we get to those places, you know. But it doesn't seem to last very long.
Yeah.
You know.
It's a beautiful, fleeting experience.
It is. But it's a marker. It's a marker, right? It's a marker of what's possible. Yeah. It's a marker of what's possible, what has happened. The fact that it has happened means that it's there. It's still in our history. It's still in our blood. It's still in our consciousness, you know. Mm-hmm. And that's valuable, I think, you know, because we do need to be reminded we care for each other. Yeah. You know, we need to be reminded that we are in this together all the time. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, when the guy's sitting out there and he's, you know, this homeless guy sitting out there drinking his beer, you know, he's one of us. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, but you have to remind yourself of that. Like that needs to be, and in order to remind ourselves of that, having the memory of those experiences I think is important. You know, so I think overall that, you know, I mean, if I'm going to highlight something to walk away from me as a human being, I want to walk away highlighting that. Yeah. You know, even though everything else is also true.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the, I totally appreciate it. That was fun.
Thank you.
That was a lot of fun. Thank you.